1. The baby boy wriggled in his arms, a warm, wet mass, softer than a goat and hairier than a rabbit kit. He held a blade over a candle flame for some time, then cut the cord and rubbed the baby with a wetted shirt. When this was done, he laid the child in a basket near the fire, and then stood at the head of the bed and looked down at his wife's face a long moment. Abruptly he bent low and placed his head near her mouth, staying all the while stone silent, waiting for some whisper from her lips. At last he stood straight once more, seeming to disappear into the still blackness of the low rafters, as if he had become just another of the cabin's shadows. The child began to cry, and he turned to look at it lying there by the glow of the dying fire. The man paced the floor, biting the large front knuckle of his fist. At length he picked up the child from its basket and lifted the flap of heavy hide over the doorway, stepping out into the last of the blue twilight as the rising sun began to gild the topmost trees along the crest of the ridge. Although he'd lived in its shadow almost his whole life, he stood there watching the sleeping leafy hulk closely, as if for the first time. The forest was in the full, trembling swell of high summer, the trees clamorous for sunlight, permitting only a few stray drops of gold to fall between their leaves and onto the scraggly undergrowth below. The ridge would offer nothing in the way of hindrance should men take it upon themselves to cross it. He again put his hand to his mouth and could be seen from the dark of the nearby chestnut tree to bite down hard on that knob-knuckled, much-abused fist. When the fit had passed, he sat down, cross-legged on the ground, his crying baby boy in his lap. The child's eyes were shut tightly, but its paw searched the air waveringly for something until the man put his finger down and the little hand grasped it, held it. The two waited there a while. By and by, the angel spoke from the darkness by the chestnut tree. "She's gone." "'Course she's gone. What am I doing out here with the baby if she ain't gone?" There was silence. "Yeah," he said after a while, his voice catching. "She's gone." That's how it had to be. "You didn't tell me she had to die," the man said accusingly. "You said to do whatever you told me to do and you'd keep us safe." The silence continued for so long that he knew the angel would not answer him. But he continued to sit there anyway, one arm holding the child close, while the other arm worked a stick into the packed dirt. The child had red hair, and cried and cried. Nearby, a hutch held several hens clucking pointlessly at one another. And atop the hutch, white against the still dark trees, stood the she-goat. Without his mother's rifle, he had not been able to hunt that winter, and he had been forced to slaughter the goat's kids and finally the billy one by one. Now the white little widow stood atop the hutch all day, every day, coming down to the dirt only to forage or to be milked. Even when his wife was hugely pregnant, she had milked the she-goat to keep the milk flowing. But yesterday morning her water had broken before she'd had the chance, and the ensuing afternoon and evening had been long and frightful. Now the goat's udder was strained to bursting. He fetched the basket from the cabin, set it on a stump, and laid his son inside it. Then, kneeling by the stream, he washed his hands clean of blood and grime. He rose, with much fatigue, and made his way slowly across the bedraggled stretch of dirt to the hutch, lifted the goat down, and squeezed the milk into a bucket. When the bottom of the bucket was covered with milk, he took it to the baby. Dipping his finger in the froth, he held it to the boy's suckling mouth. He sat and fed the baby like this, as the last of the dark was drawn away and the dawning sky was revealed pink and leafed with clouds. When the baby was done eating, it seemed to crumble in upon itself, and for a terrible moment he thought that the infant had died, until by the movement of its tiny fingers it became clear that the boy was only sleeping. He went inside and pulled a small black lacquer box off the shelf, and from this box removed an ivory comb, yellowed with age and impossibly delicate. The comb's handle was carved in the shape of a kneeling woman, her hands folded in prayer. She wore a long gown with flowers on the fringe, and her hair was plaited into two flowing tresses on either side of her face beneath a tiny crown. It was ancient, this comb, having belonged to his mother, and before that to a queen of England. He sat near the head of the bed and began to comb the tangles from his wife's hair. She had thrashed all night, and the odor of stale sweat hung in the room, mixing with the plummy tang of blood. He spoke softly to her, and touched her face often as he ran the comb through her hair, parting it at the scalp and arranging it on either side down her shoulders like the woman on the comb. Then he straightened her body in the bed, arranging her arms across her breasts so that her palms met in an attitude of prayer. When this was done, he took a dead black ember from the fire and, using a nail, mixed it with some of the goat's milk in a tin cup. He pulled the Bible off the shelf, lifted the age-slackened cover of the heavy book, and using the nail as a quill, beneath the names of long-dead others wrote, Rachel Bright, 1900 to 1920, wife of Henry Bright. He lifted the nail from the page and surveyed the grisly black scrawl of the epitaph. Outside, the horse began to slap its tail against the trunk of the chestnut tree. He dipped the nail once more in the ink and added, Mother to the future King of Heaven. When this was done, he held the Bible open on his knee and read the other names, but except for his mother and father's and his Aunt Rebecca's, they were all strangers to him. As he read, his hand worried absently through the pages and pulled a thistle from between the leaves where it had marked like new grass over a grave some passage that had been special to his mother. He looked now for the page, but it was lost to him, and he threw the thistle to the coals. He went to the cabin door and looked out on the child, then gazed up to the hills again, watching them closely. Nothing but the quantity of light upon the canvas-green trees had changed. He retrieved the long-handled shovel that he had last used for mucking out the chicken hutch and walked beneath the dark spread of the chestnut tree to where his horse stood. "Now get," he said. The horse was standing directly above where he wished to bury his wife. "Now get," he said again, and pushed himself against the horse's shoulder. "We have to go from here," said the horse. "We have to take the future King of Heaven and leave." "Why?" "That will be made known to you in due time, Henry Bright. First, we have to leave this place. You will burn it down." The horse bent to the patch of timothy grass and pulled up on it, munching with a broad satisfaction. "Where are we going to live if we burn it down?" Bright watched the plate-shaped muscles of the big jaws working. "That will be answered once we leave," said the angel. Bright's eyes wandered over the cabin he had grown up in. His father had gone away to the coal mines to earn money before Henry was born, and had died in a cave-in, leaving his wife to raise their son amid a wilderness of tendrils and gnats that seemed always on the verge of devouring the little house. Much later, after his mother died and Henry had gone off to the war, the chimney had returned itself to the land, becoming a tunnel of vines and birds' nests so thick that the first time he had tried to cook over the fire after he came back, the smoke had driven him outside, and the mourning doves had thrown themselves from the eaves to the ground in confused jumbles. Sometimes, as they lay in bed at night, it had seemed to Rachel and him as if the whole cabin was hurtling at great speed through the dark, so loudly did the wind wail through the chinks in the caulking. "Why do you want me to burn it down?" he asked again. "That's our house. We ain't got any other house." "Then stay here. My boy needs a roof over his head. And let your son die." Bright shoved the animal again to little effect. The horse stood its ground. "We can leave, Angel, but I ain't gonna burn it down," he yelled. "It's all I got left." On the stump behind him, the baby began to cry. Bright whirled around, shielding his own tears from the horse's view. He stood with his back to the angel for a long time, his shoulders jerking violently at first, and then slowing to a composed rise and fall. He ran the back of a hand across his face and looked at the cabin. "Henry Bright," the angel said, finally breaking the silence, "do as I say." The back of Bright's head fell forward as his chin sank to his chest. "I can't believe this," he said. All right, I'll burn it down." He ran a hand across his face, and then, turning back, he gave the horse a final push, and the animal stubbornly relinquished his ground.